Vladimir Putin does not need to lose Moscow to lose this war. In fact, it's much simpler, it's much easier, and it's much closer than you might believe. Vladimir Putin only needs to lose rail access to Crimea. And that's precisely why we should be paying a lot more attention to Ukraine's recent strikes within Russia. So we saw on the 19th that Ukraine successfully carried out large attacks within Rostov Oblast, Russia, and they struck a major rail junction there. And in fact, it was one of the last remaining arteries to Crimea. Now, more than that, it was in fact the logistics hub, the nerve center for all of southern Russia with occupied territories like Zaporizhzhia, Melitopol, aside from being the lifeline to Crimea. And what the result was very clear and immediately visible. This stranded the convoys of the Russian military. This cut off all of the fuel shipments. This froze all of the traffic. And what's incredible about this is two things. The first part that's incredible is that the Kremlin had no contingency plan. We saw that the Kremlin did not know what to do. There was no workaround because what do you do once your bottleneck gets struck? Rail is not easy just to build more of really quick. But the part that's even more incredible is that 4 days earlier, Ukraine hit a nearby junction, which means that we can probably accurately predict that this is part of something larger. Not a one off, but perhaps the beginning of a larger campaign. Ukraine today is severing Crimea's rail lifelines, one junction at a time. Now, when you consider the fact that Ukraine's new doctrine, what it's aiming for, is to just disable the war machine to cut off the ability of Russia to invade, it makes a lot of sense. We see them actively not just flying drones over Moscow, but also hitting the train hubs, the fuel depots, communications nodes. All of this is breaking rear area limbs of the war effort. And then the objective is this is the paralysis of the Russian military to cause the collapse of the Russian military. And every day, it's looking like Ukraine is getting one step closer to breaking those rail lines and to liberating Crimea. My name is Jason Smart. I'm a special correspondent for the Kiev Post here in Kiev, Ukraine. And what we're seeing right now is simply incredible. We're seeing that the Russian military is really stuck. They don't know what to do. There's increasing signs of confusion, of being lost, and realizing that it's only going to get worse. It's definitely not going to get better. So let's take a look at exactly what's going on, why things are so bad, and why it's safe to say that things will only get worse for the Russian military. I just want to give you one update first. We've been raising money for drones, as you know. And in fact, we're just short of 50,000 euros raised, which is phenomenal. Thank you so much to everybody who has chosen to donate. For those of you who wish to donate, I will put the information below. In the first comment, I'll pin it so you can easily find it. I appreciate everyone who does donate. Just one other thing, please be so kind as to like this video, subscribe to the channel. It helps me get this message of what's happening here in Ukraine to more people and to explain the truth of the Putin regime and how it's functioning. So let's dig back into this and why the railways are so very important. So 70% of all of Russia's military transport is still done by rail. So junctions like the one that were just struck are bottlenecks. That makes it impossible to simply reroute. And this hurts more than just the logistics, and it hurts more than just the supplies. Think of what this does for the morale of the Russian military. What do you do if all of a sudden you can't get supplies to them? What do you do if it's wintertime and you can no longer get food to them? You can no longer get to them heating oil. Things get worse and worse for them very quick. But it's also going to affect the way that Russia fights the war. It's going to drain more troops from the front to be sent around Russia to go defend the rail lines. Now, if your country is 11 time zones long, you know how many rail lines that is? You know what an impossible task that is? Truly a needle in a haystack trying to predict when the Ukrainian drones might show up and when they might destroy a central hub. So, as we see the rail lines going offline, Russia's summer offensive is stalling in Zaporizhzhia. It's getting worse and worse. And it's not going to get any better if they're not resupplied. Because at this point, it's very clear that Ukraine isn't interested in just holding the line. Ukraine's much more interested in deciding when, how, and where Russia will bleed. And that bleeding is happening everywhere. So, the last few days, we've seen these panic and chaos in the Russian airports. People have been lost for days, unable to get out. And it's truly becoming a situation that Russians are getting worried about. How do they know that their skies will ever open up again? And that fear is a good thing. It's good that people across Russia realize that their country is at war, illegally, against their neighbor. It's good that they wake up. But even more important is that the leaders of the country, even those who might be divorced from the reality because they're part of the upper oligarchy, they see what's happening too. They can't avoid not seeing it. They can't avoid seeing the news that the Russian government it made a strategic decision to cut spending on the railway systems, and it said, "Listen, we simply can't afford it. Railways are expensive. Though we're heavily dependent on it, we can't afford renovations. We can't afford to do anything new." And that was a decision that was probably unwise, considering that there's already a 40 million ton freight shortfall for this year for the railways. That's probably not good. How's a railway supposed to survive then if one, it's shipping less things, and two, the Russian government is not going to bail them out? Why, though, are people shipping so much less? And that gets to another underlying problem of the Putin regime. It explains to you both why the government's going to spend less on the railways and why there's less being shipped on the railways. So consider this. This year, disposable income is down 5.5%. Retail traffic across Russia has collapsed. Malls in Kazan, a major city, are 80% empty. We've seen that construction has just totally frozen. In major cities, Rostov, Samara, Omsk, it's just disappeared. People are not building. And part of that reason is because the fundamentals of the Russian economy are very flawed. They've got very significant problems. So consider this. Just earlier this year, India decreased its purchase of Russian oil by 28%. They simply don't want to be buying oil from a country that's facing more and more sanctions. They value the relationship with the European Union and the US far more than a relationship with Russia and its cheap oil. And sure enough, the EU's new sanctions have banned over 100 tankers. They removed 22 Russian banks from SWIFT. This is pretty serious stuff. Now, the Chinese have also signaled that they're not really interested in facing sanctions. They don't want to face what Senator Lindsey Graham said yesterday would be 100% tariff on their goods if they were to buy more Russian oil and gas. So Russia's got some serious liquidity problems. If no one buys its oil and gas, it's going to have some serious problems. So consider this. Russia's national budget, about 40% comes from oil and gas. About 75% of those purchases are specifically India and China. And if they walk away, who's going to step in to buy it? The truth is, there's not really anyone to buy it. There's not a lot of countries who want to face sanctions from the United States and from Europe. So you might think, well, Russia surely can step into something else. Is there something else Russia could possibly sell that will make more money? That somehow they could pull through with it? So listen to this. Kalashnikov exports are down 62%. And that's pretty incredible. When you consider the fact that one of the classics of the Russian military, Kalashnikov, they cannot even sell their own firearms. And the Russian military, even for its domestic purposes, has its own significant problems. It doesn't get better there. So Russia still relies on Western components for about 70% of its weapon systems, and factory use is under 65%. So there's not been a lot of production. There's actually been stagnation. So despite the fact that they're at war, they can't build as much as what they'd like to build. And there's not buyers of what they produce that would subsidize what they are using for their own military purposes. And now the countries around them, the countries that historically helped them to skirt the sanctions, Kazakhstan, Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, they're realizing this is probably not the right side of history. This could work out very badly for us if the Americans decide to come after us with sanctions. We couldn't afford that. That would be a very bad thing. And so they're making a choice, a strategically wise decision. Sure, we can make a little bit of money now by helping you beat the sanctions, but it's going to cost us far more in the long term. Far wiser is just say "das svidanya" to the Russians and let them get along their way. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're taking a walk. They're not interested in destroying their economies because of the Russians. Now, overall, there's other problems that the Russians are facing. And one of those biggest problems is what's coming ahead. So, Russians, incredibly enough, have this horrible idea to have an e ruble, electronic ruble. So, it's designed to centralize control. The e ruble is something that was meant that the government would able to do transactions electronically, people would receive payments electronically, but it doesn't really work out that way. So everybody understands that really it's a method for the government to control your finances. It controls your money. It has access to it. It knows exactly what you're transacting with, whom you're transacting with, and if it needs to, it can just close up your wallet. It can prevent you from making any purchases. So that's a very good way to control people in society. But there's also something else here. It's going to create hyperinflation. In fact, it's going to be a machine of hyperinflation because what it is the government just creating numbers in a spreadsheet somewhere on the internet and saying this is real money. But how then can I use it? The majority of the people who receive it, incredibly enough, are people like the pensioners. The pensioners in Russia do not have cell phones. They do not have computers. Keep in mind, the average salary in Russia, that the pensions are far less, the average salary is only about 1,000, 1,100 per month. So how are people going to use these e-rubles? Well, the fact is, it's going to be very hard for them. And that's why there's already such a huge problem of scams, account freezes. We've seen the cloning of the platforms. We've seen the public panic that this is triggering. So why does the government keep pushing through this? Why does the government continue to think that this is a good idea? The fact is, they don't know what else they can do because they don't have enough money. They're out of liquidity. They're having problems selling oil. They can't even prop up their own railways. And now they've got to fuel a war that's just eating their budget. More than 77% of their GDP, more than 7% of the GDP goes to its military. That's not sustainable. But what's even more incredible, the government, in its paranoia, has decided to put the FSB, the intelligence service, in charge of more oversight, to look into banks, to look into finances. And that's why we see them doing things that are just creating more public panic. So people, for one, are already trying to take out rubles. They don't want this e-ruble stuff. They say, give me my cash. Okay, fine. But to control this, because so many people are showing up to the banks, so many people are trying to take out their money that it could actually collapse the banks, they've started to put in different sorts of restrictions. You can't take out all your money at one time. That's forbidden. You can only take out a little bit at a time every day. And in fact, if the clerk at the bank says, well, I think he might want it for fraudulent purposes, or I think he wants his money for something else, we're not going to let him take his money. That's not the way banks are supposed to work. It's your money, not theirs. But the real reason for that, it's how they are trying to avoid runs on the bank. By not saying we don't have enough money to give you, we can't give you cash, go look at your electronic money online. Instead of doing that, they're saying, well, just right now, we can't give it to you. Come back tomorrow. Come back the day after. This is to prevent the banks from falling down, from collapsing. So, what does this all mean? How does this all fit together? So, consider this: states do not fall at their borders. What actually happens usually is they fall when the illusion of control just breaks. Ukraine's strikes at this point are doing more than just hitting the supply lines. They're doing more than just being demoralizing for the Russian military. They're destroying the confidence of the general population in the Kremlin. Now, the Crimea itself is definitely the jewel of Putin's empire, and it's been strangled. Just a couple years ago, there was a poll before the full-scale invasion of what were the greatest moments in Russian history. And Russians listed three moments as being the greatest in their history. One was Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space. The second one was victory over Germany in World War II. And the third one, Crimea being annexed and becoming part of Russia. So when they see that Crimea is lost, that even Crimea cannot be defended, what happens then? What does that mean? And given the way that the Russian troops today are just overstretched, they can't do much. Their rear infrastructure needs to be guarded all the time. Their front line has expanded. Now morale is just falling. The delays are getting worse and worse. And we see the panic is not just in the military, it's across Russia. And that's where Ukraine's strategy is brilliant. Because this is not a story about just the strikes on the specific junctions. That's important, and it serves a military purpose, economic purpose, and a social purpose, but it's part of a larger thing. This is a massive strategy. It's to delay the Russians from advancing in the east, at the same time to strike within Moscow, to strike across Russia, so the Russians have to then further split up their troops. Ukraine is executing a strategy that is exhausting Russia. And currently, Russia has no ability to regain, to recoup, or to win. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate your time today. Please like this video, please subscribe. And as always, thank you for supporting Ukraine.